Buy American, Hire American, Baja executive order. And this.
Welcome back to the Visa Vibe podcast. I'm Emily Newman, managing partner at Reddy Newman Brown PC. We help businesses, families, entrepreneurs, professionals navigate the immigration process in the United States. With me today is Stephen Brown, also a partner here at Reddy Newman, and we are celebrating our 28th anniversary, not wedding anniversary.
Yeah, not us.
Firm anniversary. Firm is celebrating the 28th anniversary, and we're doing that by looking back at the last 28 years of major developments in high-skilled immigration.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So yeah, part two here. We started off last week with coming up with the idea of 28 and 28. What are the 28 things in employment-based immigration in the last 28 years? And the big things, kind of a history. And so we're going to hit here, starting from 2016 and head to the end of 2024. I feel like we've had 28 years in the last 2 weeks.
Right.
So we're not getting there, but we'll start, kind of back there in 2016.
Yeah, if you thought the late 90s and the early 2000s had a lot of changes, wait until you hear what happened for the next 14 years. We had court cases, executive orders, pandemics, policy shift. Legal landscape was definitely changed for high-skilled immigration.
Yeah, 3 presidents, right, during this time, right? So lots going on.
Yeah, so one of the first major updates was a AAO precedent decision. That's the Administrative Appeals Office. This was on the national interest waiver case called Matter of Danisar, and it really changed how USCIS looks at the requirements to qualify for a national interest waiver. So prior to that, we had the New York State Department of Transportation rules, which were very strict, very hard to qualify for entrepreneurs, researchers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, this really, Emily, this really brought some common sense. It gave more clarity. And, really, if you want to know about Matter of Danisar, a few weeks ago, we did an episode on national interest waivers with Ryan Wilk from our office. He kind of leads that front. But this kind of brought it kind of together. And I'd suggest giving that one a listen. 2017.
Oh man.
The
Trump years.
Yes, we start getting into the Trump administration, and I think one of the first things he did was this Buy American, Hire American, Baja executive order, and this did a whole lot of things, whether it on a lot of different agencies, but from an immigration perspective, it directed agencies to get tough on H-1s, Ls, focus on higher wages, gets rid of the deference policy. We're not going to defer to previous approvals, and encourages employers to use E-Verify and made it easier to report fraud, but also created all these databases. We can go search on Department of Labor every LCA, every perm application, and see every part of it. And that was created because of this, and trying to force people to hire American.
Yeah. And it also led to information sharing between all of the different agencies. So now we have Department of Homeland Security, which is adjudicating H-1B petitions. They're sharing information with Department of Labor, who's in charge of LCA, labor condition application violations. Department of State, who's issuing the visas, Department of Justice. And so violations under one program are now being shared with other programs so that more action can be taken against those employers. But the deference memo was a huge one. I mean, that really led to denials because previously the agency USCIS, if you've been on H-1B for 6 years with the same company and you're filing an extension with the same company, same job, obviously your education hasn't changed. Nothing's changed. We would defer to that prior approval and approve your extension for the next 3 years, not after Buy American, Hire American. Now we're going to look at every single petition with fresh eyes. And so things that we got approved 3 years ago, 6 years ago, now we're questioning, is this really a specialty occupation? Well, you told me it was the last 3 times I filed, but now all of a sudden we're not sure.
And am I qualified?
Yeah.
I've been doing it for, 6 years, but now you're going to ask again if I'm qualified.
Yeah, so it created so many difficulties for H-1B workers
Yeah.
specifically because they were getting denials of their extensions, having to figure out what do I do? I'm out of status, I have to leave, refiling. It was a big mess. But then in 2017, we kind of had a something nice happen, I guess.
Yeah, we get the final rule published, and this was a rule that was put forward under the Obama administration, and it came, it was late 2016, and they finalized it, and it kind of created the high skilled worker regulation. It's got a fancy name. It's like retaining high skilled EB1,
EB1, 2,
EB3, yeah,
yeah.
all that long name. But if you type in 2017 high skilled immigration regulation, that'll get you there. And this did a lot. Before this, Emily, probably one of the big things is if you lost your job on H-1B, there was no grace period.
Mhm.
You had to leave right away. And one of this regulation helped create the 60-day grace period that we have today. And 60 days maybe not enough, but it's better than zero.
Yeah.
It also created key protections for I-140 beneficiaries. We know you retain the priority date. If you change employers and all that, generally speaking, you always retain the priority date unless there's fraud. But this created provisions about the portability, the ability to use the I-140 if it's been withdrawn, if it's been approved for more than 180 days and then the company later withdraws it, you can now use under this regulation that I-140 for all the H-related benefits, meaning, the extensions beyond the 6 years, meaning H4 EAD. And it used to be, once it was gone, it was gone. And so a lot of big things that this regulation did that we now rely on because the backlog, like we talked about, only got worse.
Yeah, and it also with that job portability under AC 21, it kind of finally implemented regulations
Yep.
for AC 21. So AC 21 was passed by Congress in 2000. So it took 17 years, but they eventually passed regulations that clarified all of those different provisions of AC 21, when you can get a 7th year extension, when you can get the 3 year extensions, how long can you keep getting those extensions?
Yep.
Because that was a question. They've actually limited it, saying that once your priority date becomes current, you can no longer keep getting those 3 year extensions. You can only get 1 year extension, but that's in the statute. But
Yeah, they
if
created these
it's been
processes.
if it's been current for more than a year and you still haven't filed the 485, that's where the problem comes in based on this regulation. Another big one, not so good one, was the third party worksite memo in 2018, which again just really threw a wrench into H-1B processing.
Yeah, this, came out of nowhere. We know, they've been focusing on, we talked last episode, the Neufeld memo, the right to control, and this took it to a whole new level, Emily. And this mandated contracts, it mandated itineraries, it mandated end client letters, and what you were going to do each day of the 3 years basically was the analysis. And this did a lot of things. One, a ton of denials. Not always were you able to get the end client to write a letter saying, yeah, we kind of confirmed that the job is there and we're doing it. And even though you have a contract, most of these end clients are saying, we have a contract. You don't need a letter. We have a contract and a work order. But then, even more bizarre, they shortened approvals based off these contracts. So we know H-1Bs are good for up to 3 years. It has historically been, you'd get the 3 years, right? And you can always lose it and all that. They were looking solely at the contract documents and then making decisions on that. And we ended up, because most contracts are 3 months, 6 months, maybe if you're lucky, a 1 year contract, they get renewed.
Mm-hmm.
We had approvals that were 1 day approvals. We had approvals that were expired by the time they came in because the documents had expired, long processing times, and led to, instead of we file once every 3 years, we're filing 2, 3 times a year for individuals. And this created increased denials and increased filings. And really, this started the immigration bar in the world of litigation. This is really that time because they had no real statutory basis for this. It goes well outside the scope.
Exactly. I mean, any person in a normal job can never say what they're going to be doing 3 years from now. You don't know which clients you're going to be working on
No.
their cases or what type of cases or your exact job duties 3 years from now. And USCIS just has no idea of what real world, real business is like, and expecting that these contracts are going to state what someone's going to work on for the next 3 years. That's just not real world, but they were
Yeah.
using that to shorten approvals. It was a big mess.
Yeah. So 2019, Emily, big change in the H-1B lottery. We March Madness just ended. Sorry about your Cougars' great game.
Uh,
But the real March Madness was always H-1B cap season. And 2019, well, I guess they introduced it in 2019, but it really didn't take effect until 2020. But the regulation was finalized in 2019.
Yeah. So prior to that, I mean, the month of March, we were just constantly, we were working late, working on the weekends, because we had to, for every single person that was trying to get an H-1B to start from October 1st, 6 months from now, we had to file on April 1st or between April 1st and April 5th. So every single client were trying to hurry up and file their petitions. They all waited till March to start preparing them. So it was just chaos, lots of work, lots of late nights, long hours, working weekends, preparing those for filing. And then we file them all between April 1st and April 5th. USCIS then does the lottery. And then those that aren't get selected, they just send them back to us. And so it was a weeks long process of waiting to see who got a receipt notice
Yep.
or whose petition is coming back. So we did all that work for only a relatively small percentage to actually get the H-1B. So thankfully, they changed it and made it an electronic process. So we just type in a little bit of information now in the month of March. USCIS conducts the lottery based on that. And then we prepare and file the petitions. And we've got 3 whole months to do that from April to June. So that was a very welcome change, but it also created some problems.
Yeah, it did. When we had to do the old process, the filing fee checks had to be there. You couldn't just say, never mind, I don't want this person. The filing fees were taken out. You had to put together the resources to put together these petitions, whether it's attorney's fees or people that were doing it on their own as companies. And so it takes a lot of time. Um, that's not there with this electronic registration process. And originally it was $10. And so, there was a significant spike because the cost, of getting in is much lower. And, the companies could kind of guess and they say, okay, we know there's about a 20% selection rate. I need 20 employees, so I'll file for 100 and then I'll kind of figure out, I got good resources. Anyone can do it, but I'll figure out who I'm going to do. And so I think we talk a little bit later that this reached a peak at one point where they took some action. Now, look, I think the system's great. I think there's some flaws with anything. I think overall there's a lot of positive with this. But really, one thing that was great is someone sat down and did the statistics on how the lottery was run. And I don't even begin to understand the data and the science and all that. I kind of get it, but there's a algorithm that goes into this, and what they changed in 2019 is that they were going to give you have master's cap for the 20,000, and then you have the regular 65,000. And what they were going to do is run the master's cap first. So if you qualified for the master's cap, they were going to run all those people through the lottery, and 20,000 people get selected. Great. What's left then goes into the general cap. For our master students, kind of two bites at the apple, right?
Yep. Yeah, and they did that before, but before it was we're going to choose the bachelor's cap
Yeah.
first and then do the master's cap after. And somehow by changing the order of it, it was supposed to increase the ability of master's cap to get the H-1B, which we did see that increase.
Agreed.
Didn't last long, I don't think, because of the other problems with the lottery. But yeah, so that was a welcome change.
Yeah, and it's why we see now, and I get this question, right after cap season. Oh, we found a master's cap and I was selected in bachelor's cap. That's totally cool, right? Because they run it this way. Nothing happened in 2020, like in the world at all, right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, COVID had so many impacts on immigration. Obviously, just the the lockdowns happening and causing field offices to be closed, causing biometrics application support centers to be closed, consulates to be closed. That caused delays in a lot of processes because now we can't get our green card at the consulate. We can't get our green card through adjustment of status if there's an interview required. Can't get our biometrics done to get our H4 EAD. And then on top of that, we started creating all of these travel bans. We had a travel ban for people coming from China because the virus was so big there. And there was one from the Schengen area.
I think that was a thing. Like, that was a term I had to figure out.
Yeah, it was like every week or so, we'd have to double check. Wait, is there a travel ban there now? Because they were lifting them, putting them back, lifting them, putting them back. And then on top of that, we had the H-1B and L travel ban because this obviously tanked the economy and we're worried about U.S. workers. So why are we allowing foreign workers to come and steal all of our jobs? So we're going to ban H and L people from getting the visas at the consulate. So that was a bit of a mess. Yeah, the whole system just ground to a halt, and I think it's still trying to recover.
I still think there are some recoveries. One of my a little bit humor with COVID. There was a story that broke that all of the citizenship applications were in a cave storage system in what, like St. Louis or something like that. It was Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the rules with distance and all that, nobody could get access to the cave to pull those files. I don't understand why they couldn't figure that out, but everybody learned all of a sudden together that, oh, all these were sitting in some cave.
Yes.
Literally a cave.
I think we're still dealing with that with Social Security documents right now or something.
Completely crazy, but consulates shut down. We've talked before about the impact on the green cards, with this, whether it's preference-based, diversity visas, obviously, this was a complete shutdown of the immigration system. And you mentioned biometrics, that we didn't put it in here because it's kind of gone, but 2019, they introduced the biometrics on H4, the cause for I-539s, the EAD delays. And then COVID shutting everything down really exasperated the delay problem. So,
yeah, I mean, if you can't get your biometrics done for your H4 renewal, that means we can't adjudicate your H4, which means we can't adjudicate your EAD. So people's previous EAD was expiring while they were waiting for the new one. There's nothing anybody can do, and they have a gap in their work authorization. People were just losing their jobs because they couldn't get their EAD on time. So that was a big problem. We'll talk a little bit later about how we worked to get it resolved because we did eventually get some positive movement on that. But now we move into kind of the litigation.
Yeah.
So we started fighting some of these policies. They're not based in statute. They're not following the regulatory process. There's lawsuits going left and right, but one of the big ones was the ITServe lawsuit, which was basically claiming that H-1B employer-employee relationship memo was not grounded in statute.
Yeah, the judiciary agreed. The statute is very clear on H-1B, which you have to prove. That it's a specialty occupation and that the individual is qualified. This right to control, this third, this hire, fire, pay, supervise, otherwise control is not found in the statute. The employer-employee relationship is defined as you have a U.S. employer and they have the ability to do these things, but it's not dispositive to focus on the right to control. And these third-party requirements from 2018 aren't grounded in the statute, and they didn't go through regulation. It was a policy memo. And so the short-term approvals, the partial denials, weren't given any written decisions. They are partial denials. And so, it took a couple of wins, and then the government kind of capitulated and said, we're going to come up with a global resolution to this. So this kind of brings a lot of predictability and really since then seen good trends on H-1Bs because I think the government's been seen now that we're going to get challenged on these things if we go out of line.
Yeah, so that definitely helped with now we're getting our 3-year approvals again. We're not having to submit all of the documentation at the same level to prove the specialty occupation and to prove the contract and things for 3 years. So that was a big help. But then we had another weird problem. All of a sudden, Department of Labor wants to change how we calculate the prevailing wages. And we use prevailing wages for H-1B, H-1B1, E3, as well as for PERM, labor certification process. And even though nothing changed in any of those processes, the wage requirements were like shooting
It
way
was like
up.
30-40% higher.
Yeah, and just because of a change in calculation that there was not really a lot of thought that went into. Um, so they implemented it and started issuing wages under this new policy. But then what happened to it?
Again, litigation, right? So they come up with these interim final rules. They basically say this is an emergency. We don't have to go through normal comments, the administrative process. We're just going to implement it today. And then take your comments. And they got sued very quickly. I know economists were brought in to challenge the calculation. And again, they lost. It again, look, I'm all about like get people paid, but it has to be grounded in reason and in economics and in the regulations. So again, they were told they weren't. It also messed with perm. I mean, it messed with H-1Bs. It messed with a lot of different things.
Yeah, so I remember it being in like the middle of 2020, so we hadn't had that October 2020 visa bulletin yet.
No.
But they're issuing these prevailing wages for perm at this new calculation. They're very high. We have the lawsuit. The lawsuit says you can't do it. Now they have to go back and reissue all those same prevailing wages under the old rule, which was good. But that's really kind of the tip of the iceberg at what started the processing time mess that we have at the Department of Labor for both prevailing wages and for the perm process. So it all went downhill from there in terms of delays. But we also had wage issues coming up with H-1Bs. Somehow it's tied to your whether your job is a specialty occupation and we can't use a level 1 wage.
Yeah, this was this random pivot on we saw two challenges to the wage level. One, Department of Labor has guidance on how to determine prevailing wage. It's an equation, essentially. You look at certain factors, you come up with which wage level. And USCIS all of a sudden started asking two different questions, and sometimes both together. And they said, well, you used an entry-level job for this kid right out of college. You said this was an entry-level, level 1 position. We don't think that's a specialty occupation. You can't be a specialty occupation and be entry-level. And wrote denials like that. Got sued, lost. Then they would also had, we don't think you've used the right wage level. You said it was level 2. It should have been level 3. It should have been level 4. USCIS's job isn't that. And again, sued, lost. If you're noticing a trend.
Right.
But this caused a lot of confusion because you had companies, again, hiring college students. They didn't need to be paid senior level jobs. They weren't doing senior level work. USCIS all of a sudden took this position that they should. That's bizarre.
Yeah, and it wasn't based on any changed policy or changed regulation. They were just doing it in RFEs.
Right, there's nothing announced.
So that was interesting. And now another area where litigation made some changes was at one point the government was going to run the H-1B lottery based on wages. Now I know a lot of people think that sounds like a good idea where we only have 85,000 visas, they should go to the highest paid people, not a random lottery. Kind of makes sense, but at the same time there are work locations that have very different wages. A level 4 wage here in Houston is going to be quite different than a level 4 wage in San Jose. Also, who's going to enforce this? Like once you get the approval, you've been selected because you said you're going to pay $300,000 a year. Who's checking if you actually paid $300,000 a year? You already got the visa. You won.
And then what happens if you aren't? Really, what's the consequence?
So, enter litigation.
Yeah. So, again, all in favor of people getting paid as much as they can. But you had a group of nonprofits that didn't qualify as CAP exempt that were saying, wait a minute. Like, we can't compete. And we're part of this system, too. And it can't just go to, really, West Coast big tech, Google, Apple, all that. And what about, hospitals, doctors, stuff like that in rural areas that were using H-1B? And then more importantly, this is not found in the statute. H-1B with the issuance of the 85,000 visas, um, the statute's written that it's basically first come, first serve. Now, we have a lottery because that is impossible with it being oversubscribed. But we've talked before, it didn't used to be. It used to be kind of a first come, first serve, and then they'll let you know we hit the number and we're done. But the statute says it's, in the order in which they're received. And that doesn't allow for this power ranking, is what I kept referring it to. And then, like you said, this is what's the enforcement measure? How do we really check this, especially with the online registration system? So this was a rule. It was about to be implemented, and before it could even, we never saw this.
Yep. So all of this is going on, and because of COVID, because of that biometric requirement for the I-539, we're continuing to deal with the delays in H-4 EADs and also L-2 EADs. So back then, if you were in L-2 status, you had to separately apply for an EAD to be able to work. And so if your EAD is delayed, you can't work until you get your new EAD in. And so litigation again saves the day. And this is, Stephen was involved in this litigation, actually filed the case, and turned out we were able to get a settlement from USCIS on it.
Yeah, so we had done a lot of group cases on delays, and we gathered a ton of information. I mean, we had FOIAs, we had depositions, we had everything. And so, yeah, the team that had been working on this, and it had been a few of us together really at the tip of the spear, and we said, time to bring it. Like, we're going to have our coup de grace here and go all in. And we brought Etta Cooney v. Mayorkas, challenging H-4 EAD delays, really the bundling policy and the delay. And we did that as a class action, and we'll talk about that. And we're in the middle of this, and they're like, we can't do automatic extensions for H-4 EADs because we need the underlying H-4 to be approved first, which is silly. Mm-hmm. And so we got onto a phone call. We said, there's a group that has the H-4 already approved. Maybe they've got it for consular processing. Back then they separated out H-4s, and then later, months later, approved the EAD. Why don't they get automatic extensions? And then why do L spouses have to apply for EADs when the statute says they are authorized to work incident to status, meaning by being an L2 spouse, I can work. And so we brought a sister case, Shergill v. Mayorkas, to challenge the automatic extensions for those specific H-4 contexts. And then the L2 automatic, being work authorization incident to status. And we were able to settle that because I think we were obviously well in the right to do that. Remember, 2021, lots going on, coming back on things, but this was big. And then, Etta Cooney, we ended up getting a settlement to go back to the normalcy of pre-2019 bundling, and sort of gone, sort of here, depends on the officer, I don't know. But we're still seeing pretty good processing times when they're filed together, if not automatically together. I mean, I don't see the waits. We saw people, the H-1B would get approved in premium, and then it would be a year before the H-4 EAD. I mean, I think now maybe 3 months. It's a lot better, thankfully.
Yeah. And then we also in 2022 had updated guidance for STEM, trying to basically encourage STEM in the United States. And we want more people who are in STEM in the US because we have companies that are competing globally and they need to have the workers that can do this. So they enhanced the STEM OPT by expanding the list of degrees that can qualify for the STEM OPT. So this allows people who have a STEM degree, graduated here from a US school on F1, to be able to get that extra 2 years of OPT time if they're on the STEM degree list. So there are more degrees on that list, so now more people get the OPT. Also updated guidance for O1s, extraordinary ability, to make it, because a lot of our regulations and policy memos are based on what was the technology at the time they're issuing the memos. And so there's this AI coming out, machine learning, all these new things that weren't really contemplated by the prior guidance. So we get new guidance that really tries to, again, encourage people to file in those categories if they're in these cutting edge.
Yeah, and this is big, especially for the AI. I mean, like, look where we are now, and this was, I think, because of this. We didn't want to fall behind, and as troublesome as some things can be under the Trump administration, I know this memo has sort of, the EO that said, hey, like, let's focus on this, has sort of been rescinded. It's not in practice. They're still wanting. I mean, why would we not want to steal the best and brightest from every country and bring them and have them here developing for us? We've done that for generations. I mean, our rocket program was built on German scientists. Why are we not wanting to be at the forefront? Because we're being restrictionist. And this was big and good. So 2022, I really thought this next topic I was going to have like a little bit different update than I get an email like an hour before. There are groups that have been suing on the H4 EAD since its implementation. And we talked about it last week that these things are still being fought. And you have Save Jobs USA, which is part of these groups that want more restrictions on immigration. And, they fought the OPT lawsuit, lost. And they're challenging the H4 EAD. They have lost at the district court. They lost at the appellate court. They did a motion up to the Supreme Court, because this is all on emergency type motions, and the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to hear it. Sent it back down. They lost. Petition for review at the Supreme Court. And, I think DHS felt so good, they said, we don't need to submit a brief. Like, go look at everything. And just today, the Supreme Court said, we want briefing. I still feel very good about the legality of H4 EAD. I really do. Every court has, both at the district court and the appellate court, looked at there is wide discretion to grant work authorization. And when you look at AC 21, this kind of meets some of the congressional vibes, if you will. And, one question I keep getting and I keep seeing is like, well, Chevron deference is going. Well, what's Loper Bright going to do? The circuit court dealt with Chevron deference in a footnote that said the answer is so clear in the statute, we don't have to even go through deference. So I don't think Loper Bright, the lack of Chevron deference is going to change it. We'll see, though. It is certainly something to keep an eye on at the Supreme Court.
So the H4 EAD is still alive. Still some questions about whether it will continue. We still don't have the agenda, the regulatory agenda for spring to let us know if the Trump administration maybe is planning something to eliminate it.
Which they tried in the first administration. And, frankly, the rumor I always heard, the reason we never even saw proposed rules, they could not get through the economic harm that getting rid of it would have. Whether you're talking about people out of work, that hurts tax dollars and all that. Companies that are run by H4 EAD holders, or hold key roles there. No, I mean, we'll see. It's something to definitely keep an eye on because it was tried the first time.
All right. So through these years, we mentioned earlier, 2020 was when they implemented the electronic registration for the lottery. So we had that 2021, 2022, 2023, and the numbers of people who were registered in that lottery just kept going up and up and up. 400,000, then 700,000.
Like 50,000.
And all of a sudden, USCIS is like, hey, we got 750,000, but we realize a ton of these are duplicates.
I think it was more than half.
Yeah. So because people were trying to increase their chances of selection because the chances are so low, they would work with multiple companies to say, hey, multiple companies, please submit my name in the lottery. So one person might get their name in there 2, 3, 4, 8, 10 times. So that was one part of it. But then we also had companies saying, I want to increase the chances that my people are going to get picked. So they would work with other companies and submit the same group of names between two different companies multiple times.
Yep.
So that just skyrocketed the number of registrations. USCIS says, we think this is fraud. We think you are gaming the system. So we're going to start going after these companies. We're going to go after the individuals. We're going to possibly, start legal enforcement against them, refer them to law enforcement. So that scared everybody.
Yep.
So a lot of people that had these duplicate registrations were afraid to file the H-1B petition after they were selected. So we ended up with another round of selection, which was unexpected because they didn't get as many H-1B petitions based on all those selections based on the 750,000. So they implemented new integrity measures. They went through the regulatory process and turned it into this beneficiary-centric process. So you could have 3, 4, 5 companies submit a registration for you, but you still only get one shot in the lottery. So that really cracked down on, eliminated the need to have these multiple registrations.
Yeah, you saw people, you would see stories of people who would pay $300 to a company so they could submit it. I mean, just to increase their odds. It's not how the system is designed. And so, good on USCIS for coming up. This was, quite frankly, like all the ways I think a lot of attorneys hypothesized how to fix this. And this was a pretty good one, I think, that came about because you had to have this balance, right? It wasn't happening, but in theory, if you have a student from MIT with the job offers from all these major companies, because they're just really, really good, we want that. We want to encourage that. That's not what was happening, So we got to still encourage those few outliers that are really, really good while getting rid of this fraud. So, I think they fixed it quite a bit.
All right, we've moved into 2024. This implemented in January 2025, which was also kind of part of the H-1B lottery regulation.
Yeah.
Originally, it was all together, but they split it up to implement the lottery part first because the lottery was coming up pretty quick. And then the second half of it finalized December 2024 to take effect January 2025. This is changing some things for H-1B. So it, for the first time, allows an H-1B beneficiary, if they own the company, the majority ownership and control of the company, their company can still sponsor them for an H-1B, which was not allowed before.
Yeah, and the big reason it wasn't is the employer-employee relationship, right? You had to have a group that could hire, fire, pay, supervise, or otherwise control you. So you had to have a board and all that, or whatever it would be, even if you own the company. But you also couldn't do work that wasn't non-specialty occupation, and that was a big change. They said, look, if you run your business, you could spend 51% of your time doing specialty occupation work that requires a degree in a specific field, and 49% of your time managing the business. And that's great. This was a huge step forward when, we've talked to entrepreneurs, we've talked to doctors that want to buy practices, dentists that want to start practices. So it's pretty good, round of modernization. And then the getting rid of the employer-employee relationship. That doesn't mean you don't need an employer. Well, what did they change on that?
Yeah, so now we've moved into, we want to see that there's a bona fide job offer. Not really defined, I don't think.
It doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, so we haven't really seen how that's implemented yet. I mean, we pretty much submit the same types of documents that we did to prove employer-employee relationship. Now we're submitting the same thing. We're just renaming it bona fide job offer. And we haven't seen RFEs on that yet. So
No, I think what they focused on is that they want to make sure that it's real, that you're really doing something. It's not this theoretical, I'm going to bring Emily over and we'll ever do something. I don't know yet what. That they really do have work, that they really have something that's a specialty occupation that requires a degree in a specific field. And so, it does allow for more expansion. We'll see kind of what that does. But really kind of that big update on letting people start their business. I mean, we've talked to students who are like, I've been doing a PhD project to come up with the next Chat GPT. I want to continue that as a business. I can't do that under the old rules, and now they can.
Yeah, and this rule also helped with the cap gap.
Yep.
So before, when you would file your H-1B in April and your OPT was expiring in June, you got an automatic cap gap extension to October because the H-1B would be approved and kick in October. Unfortunately, we were having long processing times for H-1Bs, and so they were still pending beyond October. People lost their cap gap work authorization, had to stop working until the H-1B could be approved. So we fixed that by extending cap gap all the way from October to the following April. So you have basically a full year of work authorization while you're waiting for your H-1B to be approved, which is going to be helpful in this round of the lottery.
Yeah, I think statistically they said about 98% are done by April. But this also helps, maybe premium processing has been suspended before, but companies shouldn't have to, students shouldn't have to, the $2,800 to do this. So this kind of helps with that. But it's been a wild 28 years, Emily. Lawsuits, executive orders, global pandemics that I don't think, when any of us started practicing, we were going to be watching the CDC guidance, on how it might impact immigration.
Yeah, and now that we're into 2025 and the new Trump administration, there's feels like things are happening every day. So we're going to have 28 things in the next 28 days, I
I
feel
think
like.
so.
But we hope we helped you understand kind of what changed in immigration over the last 20 years and why it mattered, how things that were done 28 years ago are still impacting immigration today, how so many of them are just band-aid fixes that don't really fix anything. But we hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, call your congressman.
So don't forget to subscribe to Visa Vibes, share the podcast, definitely comment if you have any suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover. We'll be diving into new topics every week.